for the glory of old state, for her founder strong and great, for the future that we wait. Praise the song, praise the song.
Sing our love and loyalty,
Sing our hopes that bright and free.
rest, O Mother dear, with thee, all with thee, all with thee.
Where else would you rather be? Welcome to the People of Penn State podcast, presented by the Penn State Alumni Association. I'm your host, Paul Clifford. Each week on the podcast, you can expect to hear the voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about. And you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State Network. You can find the People of Penn State podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice. Subscribe and give us a rating. Ratings and reviews help others find these great stories. And we have a great story lined up for you today. Today, I'm joined by Mandy Marquardt. Mandy is a member of the U.S. Cycling National Team. She has raced internationally at the Pan American Championships, UCI World Cups, UCI World Championships, and is a 22-time U.S. national champion. Let me say that one more time. She is a 22-time national champion. Mandy currently holds 3 U.S. records, 3 national records. I'm excited to welcome Mandy to the People of Penn State podcast. Welcome, Mandy.
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
Let's start right at the very beginning. How did you become a Penn State Nittany Lion? You were born in Germany, lived much of your life between Germany and Florida. How did you become a Penn State Nittany Lion?
So growing up in Florida, I was actively in cycling, competing, and I actually would come to the Lehigh Valley to race. And I have found, too, from exploring the area, that Penn State was right here. And I knew that's where I wanted to be. It's the only school that I applied to, actually. And I knew that I wanted to be here.
Excellent. So while at Penn State Lehigh Valley, talk a little bit about the things that you were involved in. How do you balance being a student, but also competing on the international level? I would imagine, we see student athletes here all the time, but when you're competing, on the international level, I think that's, there's some added, I don't want to say distractions, right? But there's some additional things that you are focused on. How did you balance being a student with being a world-class athlete?
It really came down to managing my time and communicating with professors, my coaches. It really took a lot of discipline. And I knew when I was in school, it was to focus on school and that be my focus the entire time. And then when I graduated, then I would focus on my cycling career. I actually raced collegiately while I was in school at Penn State Lehigh Valley. So it was awesome to represent Penn State and go up to main campus and compete there as well, and also compete nationally at national track events and in the Eastern Collegiate Cycling Conference. So it was just such a cool experience to be able to meet other athletes too in cycling from other schools like MIT, University of Penn. It was just such a cool atmosphere, and I wouldn't have been able to have that experience if I didn't go to Penn State and have that platform that Jim Young, the former coach of Penn State, created. He was really behind the cycling program and really collegiate cycling in the nation. So we're definitely known for cycling here at Penn State.
Absolutely. I mentioned growing up in Hazleton, the Lehigh Valley is a hotbed for cyclists who train and perform on the international level. What do you think it is about that area that draws people to it? Is it the coaches that live there? Is it the velodrome? The combination of the two? How did the Lehigh Valley become the kind of hotbed in the United States for cycling?
So I'd like to say, if you build it, they will come. And that's what Bob Rodale did here in the Lehigh Valley. He was overseas, I believe, and saw velodrome racing and loved how it brought people together. So he built the velodrome here and also has a shooting range in the back, not necessarily right in the back, but in the vicinity. And yeah, he wanted to make it a community where people enjoyed to be around. And there's also Rodale Park across the street. So it's definitely an area that attracts people. Cyclists from all over the world come here. So I have the opportunity to compete with athletes from New Zealand, Australia, South America, and they all come here to compete. And these are for important points to qualify us for important events. And that's right here in my backyard. And I couldn't be more excited every summer. I miss summer right now, being that it's winter and it's cold. But yeah, just having that structure of a velodrome and having this great area to ride and having the park across the street, there's always something going on, from racing to a group ride. Yeah, it's really great.
Absolutely. And those who are familiar with the magazine and publishing world are familiar with the Rodale name. You can't pick up a outdoor magazine of any kind, whether it's Runner's World or backpacking magazine or cycling magazines, without seeing the Rodale name, because they have really carved out a spot for publishing in the outdoor sports arena.
Yeah, sorry, absolutely. I interned at Bicycling Magazine, actually, and it was really cool to be able to be more integrated and be able to use my business management and marketing degree, my undergrad degree, and kind of see what it's like in the cycling world as well. And there's a lot of synergies too, in that, in cycling, there are events to sponsorships to marketing all types of bikes. And yeah, it's just a big community of exceptional people who really just love riding and are global.
So I would imagine for most of our audience, the extent of our knowledge around cycling is probably around two events that occur, right? I think we all have familiarity with the Tour de France, and understand what that event is all about. And then every 4 years, when the Olympics roll around, right, we see people on the in the velodrome going around the track. But could you explain to kind of a first time, observer of cycling, what the sport is all about? I know there's a number of different events within the sport, especially in the Olympic realm. How would you explain the various ways that people compete in the cycling world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I compete for USA Cycling, so the USA Cycling national team, and Team Novo Nordisk, which is the world's first all professional diabetes cycling team, and we're all racing with type 1 diabetes. And under USA Cycling and part of the national team, we race all over the world. So as a track sprint cyclist primarily, I definitely don't do the Tour de France. That distance is way too far for me. I'm basically a weightlifter on a bike. I focus more on explosiveness, power, strength, and a lot of sprinting is mental. And what it comes down to is training about 30 to 40 hours a week and racing on a velodrome that's banked at about 45 degrees, 250 meters. We're here, the one in the Lehigh Valley is 330 meters, and it's only banked 27 degrees and it's concrete. So internationally, we compete on a different velodrome. So it does create quite a transition too of tactics and different race possibilities that do happen, as far as just the biggest part is tactics. And so under USA Cycling, there are 7 disciplines, one of them being track that I focus on. I've never tried mountain biking or cyclocross, but those are all things that I do want to try when I retire. So cycling is very broad, but with track and track sprint specifically, we compete globally and here in the Lehigh Valley.
So I'm fascinated by the strategy behind the sport. I'm just a casual observer. I would say that I don't follow the sport, but it strikes me as interesting that some of the races are multi-laps around the velodrome. But at some points, the cyclists seem to come to almost a standstill or a stop, so that to try to get the other one to sprint forward, where they take a several lap race, and it really comes down to the last lap of the race and really who's the strongest in the in that like short sprint. What is the strategy behind what I'm describing here?
Yeah, so in endurance racing on the velodrome, they are competing in events that are anywhere from 40 to 200 laps. Just depends on the specific race, whether it's a points race where they point every 10 laps, where they sprint every 10 laps and accumulate points. Whereas sprinters, on the other hand, they go through a 200-meter qualification, and then they get seeded into a sprint tournament. So you bracket through fastest versus slowest. And that is where you saw people, they ride really slow. There's 2 laps and 3 laps indoors, but it's 2 laps. And yeah, if you go right away, then they're just going to get a draft off of you and pass you. So it's all about knowing the other rider's strengths and weaknesses, and knowing your strengths and building off of that. So when you ride really slow, once you hit top speed, you're going to be dropping off. So you want to hit top speed before they hit their top speed and you cross the finish line first. So each rider that you're riding against, you could be racing 9 times in a day, which is a lot because you're going 100%, where as an endurance event, you might mess up and you might not get that point or that lap, and you have another chance. But in cycling and sprints, if you mess up, you're pretty much out of the sprint tournament. So there is a lot of psychological and mental strength that needs to be there as far as physical as well.
It's fascinating to think of it as a bracketed or a tournament sport. I was thinking of it more along the lines of swimming, for example, or like the multi-heats that you might see in a track and field race, where it might be multiple heats, but the best time is how they would rank. So I would imagine there's even strategy that's involved in qualifying for the bracketing, right? So that you, is it advantageous to be the fastest? Are there people who game the system because they might be the fastest, but they want to be somewhere in the middle of the bracket?
Yeah, so your focus is definitely qualifying at the top, because then you're racing people that are slower, and then once you get through to the semifinals and finals, you're racing people more at your level, and that's where you're looking at in the earlier rounds, did I conserve my energy as well? I know that I have a longer sprint than this rider, so I want to take the rider longer. I don't know what gear they're riding. So it's definitely very mental, and going through an entire sprint tournament is a lot of mental as much as it is physical. And I would like to add too that in total there are 4 sprint events. So you have the sprint, which is the qualification with the sprint rounds. Then you have the Kieran, where it's 6 riders who are lined up. You follow the motorcycle for 3 laps, which brings you up to speed. And then it's pretty much a drag race for 3 laps. So it shuffles around with riders, and it can get pretty aggressive, some bumping of elbows. We're riding and racing at about, say about 45 miles an hour. And sometimes even 50, and it gets quick and aggressive. And then there's the team event, which is called the team sprint. So it is where you have 3 riders, and it's basically the team against the clock, but also then you're riding and racing against another team across the track. And it's really just against the clock. And the fastest person, usually the starter leads out the second rider, and then the third rider finishes that lap, and then you have an overall time. And that's really important as well. And then the 4th is a 500-meter time trial. There's 4 events. I can talk all about them. There's a lot of training that goes into them, and different approaches. And yeah, but my favorite is a sprint, because that's pure just power and mental and physical strength.
This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined today by cycling champion Mandy Marquardt. Mandy, let's take a step back. How did you get involved with cycling? I see a lot of kids that they play soccer, they're playing lacrosse. How did cycling get introduced to you, and at what age, and how did you take off with it?
Growing up in Florida, originally being in Germany, growing up in Florida, I was running, swimming, playing tennis, doing all those things because it was warm in Florida and I could do that all year round. And my parents both knowing that I both wanted to try track cycling and also triathlons, found a velodrome. And in Florida, it was actually the only velodrome. And it was only 15, 20 minutes from our house. And it was just a perfect fit. I loved it. I was doing triathlons, but I really fell in love with track cycling. I just thought it was so much fun. But I was also doing road racing. I was actually an endurance rider for a very long time until about 2012. My coach identified that I had sprint potential, transitioning to a new coach. And my career just took off after a couple of years, and I found my groove. And actually, when I was 14, I moved back to Germany to live and race there and live with my father. And that's where a big turning point in my life happened.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that turning point. You were diagnosed with diabetes at 16. What were your thoughts? What were your thoughts on how it would affect your career as a cyclist, your Olympic dreams, everything that you had been planning on up to that point, and then this challenge is introduced. Talk a little bit about how diabetes kind of initially affected your training and how it continues to be part of your life now.
Yeah, when you're saying that, is pretty cool to see the changing diabetes jersey, because I would have never thought my life would have gone to a point where cycling and diabetes could help other people and help a lot of people around the world. And so when I was diagnosed at 16, I was just doing some routine testing and blood work with the state cycling team that I was a part of in Germany. And they told me I had elevated blood sugar levels and I had no idea what that was. And they said I might have type 1 diabetes. And I thought it was maybe something that I have caused on my own. Knowing I was 16, I was like, did I eat too much German chocolate? Did I eat too much candy? And just going through that experience was tough. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks with my father, who was there every day. My mom was actually living in Florida. And so I really just had my father, and I didn't know any other athletes or people who had type 1 diabetes at that time. So it was really hard to go through. I was just learning how to manage my diabetes, how this food affected my blood sugars, how much insulin I needed to take. I was like, there's so much more that I had to think about. All I wanted to do is just go ride my bike. Right. And I wasn't able to do that. When I was at the hospital too, I had a doctor tell me that I would never be able to compete at a high level in my sport. And that is when I thought my entire career was over because of a type 1 diabetes diagnosis.
Well, I think we've come a lot further since those days. I know that there are a number of athletes. You compete on a team entirely of athletes with type 1 diabetes. Penn Staters who are familiar with our wrestling program will remember Jared Verclaren, who wrestled here at Penn State, who was type 1 diabetic. And there's certainly additional hills to climb, if you will, being a type 1 diabetic and competing at the level that you compete at, because there's an interplay between adrenaline and insulin and your diabetes. Can you talk a little bit about what you might have to do to prepare for a big competition, or prepare for those exciting moments during that competition that other athletes may not have to think about?
Yeah, it's definitely being able to manage stress, because stress does affect blood glucose and everything I eat and everything I do, from sleep to training. And I train twice a day. So when I'm starting to get consistent in my training routine, and have good sleep and good nutrition, I feel good about my diabetes management. I have a continuous glucose monitor that I'm able to track my blood sugars. But with the pandemic over the last couple of years, I have not been able to race as much. So when I did race earlier in Hong Kong, Last year, I struggled because it was a 52-hour travel. We had some COVID era travels that happened, and it just made it really difficult. And I struggled managing my diabetes, and I was frustrated because I prepared for a long time to compete again, and that was really hard for me, knowing, and I've never wanted diabetes to be an excuse, but it was something that I really struggled with. And as much work as I've done to manage stress and do everything with my sports psychologist, it was just my body was not used to that travel and that type of fatigue again. So a lot goes into it, and it's just knowing your body and being in a consistent routine and just constantly monitoring my blood sugars and my training and my sleep. It's just everything's just 24/7.
Absolutely. How has being a world-class cyclist, competing on the international level, how has that given you a platform to help others who struggle with type 1 diabetes, other teenagers who are diagnosed with it? What kind of platform does that provide for you to show others what is possible, even though you have this diagnosis?
Yeah, to show others that it's possible with diabetes is incredible. To be able to have the platform with Team Novo Nordisk. We're racing all over the world. They have the men's pro team that are racing and making an impact worldwide, where younger kids are going up to their bus, taking pictures, sharing stories. There's messaging. It's definitely an incredible team that is just more than cycling. And Team Novo Nordisk really it's changed my life. And I've been a part of the team for 11 years. And their support in this entire process and journey, just to be able to relate to other people who have the same thing, and to be able to meet other young kids who see that it's possible what we're able to do, and even parents knowing that they're able to help their child, do whatever they want to do. And that's just as simple as it is it's important to have people there being examples. And I'm really fortunate that I'm able to help others through the sport and through something that I love to do.
Mandy, one of the things I'm often struck by is how people like you who compete at the highest level possible do so with a lot of constraints on their time, right? I think about, we're seeing the pictures here. There's time that you spend training, right? You're on the cycle, you're on the bike, and you're training on the technical aspects of the sport. You've described yourself as a weightlifter on a bicycle, right? So we saw the pictures of you in the weight room, but also at the same time, you were an undergraduate student at Penn State, Lehigh Valley, seeking a degree while competing at this level. And now you're seeking your further business degree through the Smeal College of Business at Penn State. What is it about kind of packing your schedule the way that you do that helps you to perform at the highest level?
Mentally, it's having that balance. So being out of school since 2014, I wholeheartedly gave everything to the entire process. And then when the pandemic hit, and those few years even before that, I knew that I wanted to go back to school because I was thinking about my future even after my career. But I'm not even sure when my career is on the end. But I knew that I wanted to continue my education. And with the Penn State World Campus and Smeal College of Business, I'm able to take my degree on the road with me. And I thought, why not? Why not give this a shot and just step out of my comfort zone and get back into school and learn? And I first questioned if my experiences would bring value to the classroom, because I haven't been integrated in the business world, to say, in that aspect. But I have leveraged my own contracts, my own sponsorships, working with a personal PR manager. I mean, that takes a lot of communication and organization. And I feel like a lot of my experiences have helped me to become more confident in the process that I'm in, to be able to balance school and also cycling. So when I'm on the road and I have downtime, I feel like that time is valuable.
Absolutely. Let's talk about what's next for you. You mentioned the competition in Hong Kong and how that didn't necessarily work out the way that you had hoped for. but we have also a shorter turnaround time to the next Olympics. So is that still your focus, training and preparing to make an Olympic team?
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to be in Paris at the 2024 Olympic Games. It means so much to me. I've worked really hard, and it would be an incredible feeling to know that I'm able to reach more people with diabetes and to race at the highest possible level and platform in the world. And to be able to be there and represent my country would be incredible. And I've done that throughout the years at major events, and I'm so close. And being an alternate for the Olympic Games for Tokyo was difficult, but I'm motivated to continue to move forward. We have a training camp at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs happening in January, and I'll be back on the road. I'll be there for 4 weeks, then home for a bit, and then I'll be over in Europe for our first Nations Cup, which they've renamed. It was World Cup, now it's Nations Cup, but same meaning, same impact, points matter, and yeah, that's the goal, is that 2-year qualification begins in April, and I'm excited for it.
Well, you have 740,000 alumni worldwide cheering for you as you continue to chase your Olympic dreams. This is the People of Penn State podcast. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by cycling champion Mandy Marquardt. Mandy, we like to have a little bit of fun here on the podcast at the end. So I'm going to throw you a couple quick hitter questions, and you just share the first thing that comes to mind. So first one, what is your favorite venue or city to race in?
Whoa, that's a tough one. I have a couple, but one that really always stands out to me is Hong Kong, actually. Really like the city, the velodrome, the food, the people. It was just a really great experience.
And how about your favorite class at Penn State?
Really? I enjoyed almost all of them. Probably the marketing classes, just because I like to present and work with team members. I really liked my professor, Mike Kraja, who is still had big impact in my life, always keeping me on my toes by saying what's next, and making sure everything's kind of aligned.
If you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why?
Serena Williams. I grew up playing tennis, and she's just a powerhouse athlete, mom, business owner. It's someone that I've always really admired, and it'd be so cool to just learn and just go through things with her that I feel like I faced. She's had some challenges, and it'd just be awesome.
Absolutely. If you've been able to travel all around the world and compete at the highest level, what's the most unusual "we are" moment that you've had? That unexpected place where you ran into a Penn Stater and either you said "we are" or you heard "we are" that you weren't really expecting?
I guess on my bike, every time I wear my Penn State Lehigh Valley cycling kit, someone will always say something, whether if I stop at a coffee shop or through their car, yelling out their window of their car, where first it startles me, but they have good intentions. They're not telling me to get off the road. But yeah, it's always such a good feeling wearing the kit and representing Penn State here in the Lehigh Valley and also globally.
Beyond the cycling team that you are a part of, what is your favorite Penn State sport?
I would have to say football, although this is really embarrassing. I've only been to one football game.
Oh my God. Well, we're going to have you back when we honor the Olympians of 2024. We're going to have you back and on the field and experience that the right way.
I'd love to. It was so hard because when football season came around, I would always be on the road traveling because that was when my World Cup season was. Yeah, it was just really tough, but I definitely want to be there more and would love that opportunity.
And how about your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
The Alumni Swirl.
Alumni Swirl. That's fantastic.
It's so good.
I think that's apropos too, because you continue to serve Penn State, as if you don't have enough going on with your training and being a World Campus student, you're on the Lehigh Valley Alumni Society board. Talk about why it's important to give back to your alma mater now that you're in the alumni world.
I always say I spent 4 great years there, so why would I leave and just disappear? I definitely wanted to find ways to continue to stay involved. So when I was a cycling coach there for a few years, it was such a great experience to be able to be more involved and help others on campus. And then my career took off and I was on the road more. But when I was home, I was able to, still find ways to be involved. And I wanted to stick around and come to some of the meetings. We actually had a major event at the velodrome that I helped the Alumni Society board with. And that is when they've asked me to be a part of the board. It's actually a kickoff for Bobby Lee and Matt Baranowski, who are 2 Penn State alums who went to the Rio Olympic Games. And it was just really great to be a part of that. And they then asked me to be part of the society board. And although I can't always be at every meeting, I definitely try to help. And that's through with the marketing committee and their social media channels. And any way I can help push out information and just let more people know on campus what we're all about. I think it's important for students to stay involved. And, being one of the largest alumni networks in the world, it's important to use those resources and stay connected and continue just to keep learning and growing. And that's what I want to continue to do and give back.
Well, we are so grateful for your service back to your alma mater. For those of you who recognize the Matt Baranowski name, rings a bell to you. Matt was featured on a cover of the Penn Stater magazine in 2016, part of that long line of Penn Staters and the connection to the cycling world down at Penn State Lehigh Valley. Mandy, thank you so much for joining us on the People of Penn State podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
If you liked this episode, I hope that you will subscribe to the People of Penn State podcast in your favorite podcast app of choice. And while you're there, go ahead and give us a rating and drop us a review. Help us spread the word. Share the podcast with your friends and with fellow Penn Staters via social media channels, and tag the Penn State Alumni Association with @PennStateAlums. If you're a member of the Penn State Alumni Association, thank you so much for your support. If you're not a member, what are you waiting for? Visit our website at alumni.psu.edu, and you too can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thanks for tuning in and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are.
And we stood at childhood's gate, shapeless in the hands of fate. Thou didst mold us, dear old state, dear old state, dear old state. May no act of ours bring shame to one heart that loves thy name. May our lives but swell thy fame,
Dear old state,
dear